What's up, babes? Welcome back to episode 3 of The Juicy Truth. I'm Dr. Jenny. Today, we're going to be deep diving into the world of hormonal birth control, which I know is a big concern for a lot of the people in my audience. It's something that I've personally had a lot of experience with, both in my own healing journey and helping a lot of women on their own to decide if staying on hormonal birth control is the right choice for them. So today, we're going to go through, a kind of a deep dive of what hormonal birth control even does in the body, how it can impact you, how, my journey with birth control has unfolded. And then we'll talk about some ways that you can really support yourself if you choose to stay on birth control, or if it's the time for you to come off. So please note, and I should preface this with saying, I am not your doctor. This is something that's a deeply personal decision, whether to go on birth control, stay on it, come off of it. I cannot make that decision for you. I can share my experience, the one that I've had in my own body, as well as the women that I've worked with, but this is truly a personal journey for you. So what I plan to do with this episode is just give you as much information as I can about the pros, the cons, the alternatives, and then you can make a decision for yourself. So had to get that off my chest first. I'm not your doctor. I wish I was, but I can't advise you on a situation like this. So for myself personally, the true beginning of my healing journey into coming back into my body, coming home to my body, understanding how the fuck my body works, started with coming off of birth control. And for me, this was a kind of a difficult decision at the time because I had no idea what was going on with my body. It took me until going to medical school until I figured out, how the female body actually works, how our menstrual cycle works, and that I didn't actually have to be on hormonal birth control to prevent pregnancy, which was the main reason I went on. All things considered, hormonal birth control, whether you're taking the pill, the IUD, the patch, the shot, they are fairly effective at preventing pregnancy. But had I known that there were other options, had I known the risks of going on hormonal birth control, had I known, what it really does to the body, I don't know if I would have made that decision. Actually, I don't think I would have gone on it. But unfortunately, at the time, when I was 17 years old and was offered birth control, I didn't really know there was any other options. So I want you to know that there are things to consider before going on. There are things to consider if you're staying on birth control. And I just want you to have as much information as you can. So for me, my birth control journey started around the age of 17, which for some women is actually delayed. A lot of women go on birth control around 13, 14 years old, which is absolutely fucking wild to me because your body is still developing at that time. And when I talk about hormonal birth control, we kind of lump in multiple different types, but the biggest thing that, I'll be talking on today is the oral contraceptive pill. So this is one of the more common forms of birth control, but this also lumps in, the IUD, the Depo, the Nexplanon, the patch. They're all some form of hormonal birth control. And although they do work a little bit differently, they have a lot of overlap in terms of side effects and risks and things like that. But for the most part, we'll be talking about oral birth control. I know this is what, my journey started with, and it's what a lot of women end up coming to me because they're on. So I was offered hormonal birth control for many years before I turned 17 because I had painful periods. There was no investigation as to why I had painful periods. Just like, well, this is just the way it is. So they gave me a naproxen script and offered me hormonal birth control. And at the time, a part of me and then also a part of my mom, they're like, no, that doesn't feel like the right decision. So I took the pain med script and I went on my merry way and didn't really think about why every single month I had a day where I was just sobbing uncontrollably, in excruciating pain, had to miss school. Like there was no red flags that went off in my system. I just thought that was normal. My mom had really painful periods. So again, we just kind of wrote it off as being normal. But, from the beginning, around age 14, I think that's when I started getting offered birth control. And of course, there was no conversations, at least that I remember, again, this is a long time ago, about other alternatives, about what going on birth control even means for the body. So this, later in life was very frustrating for me to kind of sit with. So I ended up going on birth control at the age of 17. I'd been dealing with painful periods for quite a while. I was taking the pain meds, but I wanted something to take that pain away, and I didn't really know that I could understand why that was happening for me in the first place. So I ended up going on, right before I went off to college, for contraceptive purposes as well. Again, had I known that there's other ways to prevent pregnancy pretty efficiently, effectively, I don't know if I would have taken it at that point. But there is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but with these alternative methods of pregnancy prevention, it does involve more education on your body. It does involve more responsibility, more, again, more education, and you have to be more connected and understanding of your body. And at the time when I was 17, I don't know if I would have been able to do that. So this is all to say that going on birth control is a very personal decision. Again, nobody can make that for you. There's a lot of very valid reasons why women go on birth control, contraceptive included, pain management included, because some people who experience things like really painful periods, fibroids, endometriosis, the best option is a Band-Aid, and birth control is a Band-Aid. So there are definitely circumstances where birth control is the best option for these women. So don't at me. There's absolutely reasons why women can go on birth control and experience a lot of symptom relief. And for that, I'm really thankful that they have that option. What I don't like about hormonal birth control and the way that it's prescribed by the average physician, I think they all have good intentions. I think it's just when all you have is a hammer, all you see is a nail. So if the only tool that you have for women who are experiencing really painful periods, mood swings, irregular cycles, when the only tool that you have is hormonal birth control, of course you're going to offer it because you're trying to help your patient. So there's real, very valid reasons why women go on birth control. I completely respect and understand that. I went on it because I was having a lot of pain. My cycles were kind of irregular and I wanted protection from unplanned pregnancy. What I don't like with prescribing a birth control is that it is used as this catch-all, this cure-all, this whatever proposed solution for so many different concerns, and they're never actually, addressing why this concern is happening in the first place. Take, for example, me, having really, really painful periods to the point where I was missing school, I was getting really sick, I was having really significant mood swings. Nobody ever questioned anything. It was just like, oh yeah, you can go on birth control and take it away. Taking away symptoms is great. We want symptom relief. But for me, I also want to understand why that's happening in the first place. And I think a lot of people who start to question birth control is because that they have that same curiosity. It's like, why was this happening to me in the first place? Why did I need to go on something to, take these symptoms away? Why didn't I investigate what was actually going on under the surface? So when we throw birth control at all of these problems, yes, they may be taken away temporarily, but what I've seen happen and what happened with myself is women come off birth control eventually because you can't stay on it forever. I had one patient who had been on birth control for 30 years, and oh boy, I had many thoughts that day. But it is not a long-term solution. It's not something that we want to be staying on for decades and decades and decades, especially the oral contraceptive pill. Something like the IUD, the Nexplanon, those have a little bit longer life in terms of safety and efficacy and tolerance. But the oral contraceptive pill was never meant to be a really long-term solution, and women are staying on it for decades, coming off of it and feeling even worse. So for my story, I started on it because I wanted contraceptive. I wanted my painful periods to go away, and they did. Because what happens when you're on hormonal birth control is you're not having a real period. You're having a withdrawal bleed. You are taking a week off, you're taking the sugar pills, the placebo pills, and not having that daily dose of hormone causes you to bleed. You're not ovulating, which is the main event of our menstrual cycle. You're not ovulating, therefore you're not having a real period. A real period happens after ovulation when the egg is not fertilized and we need to shed the uterine lining. So first things first, if you're on hormonal birth control, especially the pill, you're not having a real period. If you're on the IUD, you might still be ovulating, so it's kind of a fuzzy area. But if you're on the pill, you're having a pill bleed, you're having a withdrawal bleed, you're not having a real period. And therefore, because you're on this low dose of hormones every single day, your real hormonal picture, what's actually going on, is suppressed. We don't know. Your body's not operating the way that it's naturally supposed to. As somebody with a uterus, you are supposed to go through ebbs and flows every single day throughout the month. We're on an infradian rhythm, meaning we're on a rhythm based on our ovulation, based on our menstrual cycle, and our hormones need to ebb and flow and fluctuate based on that rhythm. When you take that away, substitute a low dose of synthetic hormone, aka birth control, the body can start to feel a little shitty, a little funky, because it's not how our bodies are designed to operate. We're literally taking away the natural rhythm of your body, of your uterus, of how your physiology wants to function, and we're substituting a synthetic hormonal state, similar to the hormonal state of menopause. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to be in menopause any longer than I have to. So the 7 years that I was on birth control, I'm like, damn, can I get those 7 years back? This can explain why so many of us who go on birth control feel just kind of blah. A lot of people struggle with anxiety, depression. If you're like me, you might even go, as far as experiencing suicidal ideations and severe depression, which is actually a decently common side effect of going on hormonal birth control. Unfortunately, significant anxiety, significant changes in mood, depression, and or suicidal ideation can happen in many women who go on oral contraceptive. This does not mean all of them. There are some women who tolerate it really well. They feel fine. It's a great solution for them. I love that for you. That was not my personal experience, and a lot of the women that I've talked to has not been their experience either. So these women are going on hormonal birth control to take away these uncomfortable symptoms, to prevent pregnancy, and do whatever whatever else they went on it to intend. And when they come off, sometimes they feel worse. If you're like me, you didn't feel great the whole time you're on birth control, the whole 7 years. I experienced anxiety, depression. I experienced a lot of mood swings. I experienced weight gain. My boobs did get bigger. That was nice. I just genuinely didn't feel like myself. I felt very just disconnected. I felt uneasy. In general, I didn't feel my best. I also had headaches pretty much every day, which I didn't think about until after I came off of it. All that to say, I didn't feel great the whole time I was on birth control, but I thought it was the only option that I had. So I stayed on it. And when I decided I'd finally had enough, I was over it. I was ready to come off birth control. First of all, my doctor was a dick about it. We don't need to get too far into that, but there's so much shame and guilting and fear instilled in women who decide that they want to come off of birth control. It's like we're conditioned to be so afraid of our body. It's like, oh, well, if you come off birth control, you could get pregnant. Like that, the cycle tracking and stuff like that doesn't work. Like there's just so much fear and so much misinformation, unfortunately, still being spread to women who want to come off birth control. So they almost get scared to stay on it because they don't have enough information. So I'm going to give that to you here. So when I decided to come off birth control, after 7 years, I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm going to do this. I went off, and unfortunately, I felt worse before I felt better. And this is actually really common. Women can experience something called post-birth control syndrome. We can experience post-pill PCOS. Like there's a lot of things that can happen after you remove that hormonal birth control that nobody warned me about. And of the women that I've talked to, which now at this point has been quite a few, nobody really warned them about that either. They're like, oh yeah, you can just go off. You'll be fine. You can, go back to your normal life tomorrow. But unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of women, because coming off of that synthetic dose of hormone and getting back to a place where your body is regularly ovulating, regularly cycling, and feeling good can take some time. This is why I usually recommend, if you are making the decision to come off birth control, that you do at least a month, if not a couple months, of some prep work to really support your body before coming off of birth control. And I'll drop some resources in the show notes for this. I have a freebie of ways you can get nutrients in that are depleted from hormonal birth control. I also have a course called Break Up with Birth Control that really guides you through this whole process of how you can start to support your body while you're still on birth control, through that transition off, and balance your hormones and feel better after coming off birth control. It's something that you can use while you're still on it, after you come off. It's kind of designed for you to be supported throughout that transition, because this is what I needed when I came off birth control. I came off, hormonal birth control, and then things just went crazy. I developed acne for the first time in my life. I started growing hair in places that I didn't want it and didn't need it. I, had crazy fluctuations in my sex drive. It was basically non-existent. It was already pretty bad, but it went away completely. I gained weight. I was losing hair. Genuinely just was not feeling like myself, which was the opposite of what I intended to feel. And I now know that I was experiencing post-birth control syndrome. So what we can do by preparing ourselves before we come off birth control is hopefully to avoid that, make that transition a little bit smoother so that as your body, again, learns how to ovulate, learns how to cycle, you can feel really good. Again, this is the way that our bodies are really designed, is to have this ovulatory cycle, to flow through this monthly cycle and to ebb and flow with those hormones. And that's when we tend to feel our best. So coming off of hormonal birth control can be a pretty big shock to the body, especially if you've been on it for quite some time. The longer that you've been on hormonal birth control, generally, I've seen women have, better success coming off birth control if they've only been on it for a few years versus the women who have been on it for decades. It's almost like our body has to hit the reset switch and figure out how to do its job again. Because if you've been on oral contraceptive, especially, you're not ovulating for years and years and years. And then you just expect that process in the body to start working when you remove birth control. Well, sometimes it takes some time. Some women can lose their periods for a few months after coming off birth control. Some women, again, like me, can feel worse. Others have a much different experience. They feel amazing. They feel like the fog has been lifted. They feel like themselves again. That's what we want. So the ways that you can, kind of avoid that is by really supporting yourself before coming off birth control. Again, such a personal decision. But if it feels like the right decision for you, if intuitively you feel like going off of birth control, letting your body come back into its natural cycle and regulate it, then I encourage you to do so if you have the support and the resources to do that. One of the big concerns and one of the main reasons why people stay on hormonal birth control, very valid, is they don't want to get pregnant. And this was a big reason for me as well. It was something that I had to discuss with my partner because, that's a two-way street. If you are having sex with somebody who can get you pregnant, then you need to think about that risk. But we're not educated on how our body works. At least I wasn't, again, until I went to medical school. So I was so fearful of getting pregnant until I learned that with a natural cycle, you actually can't get pregnant every single day of the month. Contrary to what we've all been feared into believing, you are only fertile for a very short period of time during the month. And that is when you need to be mindful and careful of, preventing unplanned pregnancy if that's not a goal of yours. So through this process of coming off of birth control, feeling worse before I felt better, I also had to learn how my cycle was working and how to prevent pregnancy, because at the time, that's not something that I wanted. Something that was incredibly helpful for me was starting to do cycle tracking, specifically using the symptothermal method of fertility awareness. So that means that you're also taking your basal body temperature and you're charting your symptoms. We're not just using an app on your phone that predicts your cycles for you. Those, to me, are not accurate enough to rely on that as your sole form of contraceptive. However, if you're using something, my personal favorite is the Temp Drop. You wear it while you sleep. It tracks your body temperature. Something like Temp Drop, the Natural Cycles app, or even Aura, they have options for you to take your basal body temperature and then confirm when you ovulate. So if you are using that as your form of contraceptive, when you need to be careful, because again, that only happens for a certain period of time during the month. Your fertile window, I tell people, you're technically only fertile for about 24 hours. So that's how long an egg survives, but a sperm can survive about 5 days. So I like to give a generous window of around 8 days in the middle of that cycle around ovulation. Some are a little bit less conservative and say like 5 to 6 days. For me, I like to give a nice cushion. So there's about 8 days out of the month that you are considered fertile and that you need to be, careful with alternative methods of contraceptive. These are all things that I had no freaking clue about. I was never educated on by my doctor. And if I was, I may not have chosen to go on hormonal birth control. And I think this is just an unfortunate side effect of, essentially sex education in this country or lack thereof, and education from providers, where women don't know that they can't get pregnant every single day. We're not taught that. They don't know how to track their cycles. They don't know how to prevent pregnancy. And there's definitely women that do, but for the average person, going on birth control is just an easier option because it's guaranteed for the most part. It's fairly effective. But using fertility awareness methods, when you combine it with tracking basal body temperature, is upwards of 99% effective when used correctly. Then if you throw in a barrier method like a condom or something else during your fertile window, you're pretty damn effective in terms of pregnancy prevention. Things I had no clue about until I was in medical school coming off of birth control and fucking fighting for my life. Like, I wish I would have known these things. And that's why I feel so passionate about sharing it with people, because I think a lot of women stay on birth control because they're afraid of what's going to happen when they come off, and they also don't want to get pregnant. Granted, tracking your menstrual cycle, doing symptothermal method, doing fertility awareness methods, it requires responsibility. It requires a little bit of work on your end, and it requires you to understand your body. Please don't take this podcast episode as like your only resource for fertility awareness method. There's so many other resources out there. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. This is just kind of an overview of why I think women tend to stay on and what can help you coming off if that's a good decision for you. But if you decide, intuitively, and you trust yourself to come off birth control, you have the resources to support yourself, it can be something that is incredibly healing. And like I said in the very beginning, coming off of birth control was really the first step in me starting to understand my body, how she worked, what she needed, and how I could support her. Because truly, when you are on hormonal birth control, especially the pill, you're suppressing your natural cycle, you're suppressing your body's natural rhythms. And there's such a huge domino effect of this that I think, unfortunately, a lot of providers don't really acknowledge this impact. But taking away your menstrual cycle, taking away that natural fluctuation of hormones throughout the month has massive effects on the rest of the body, on mood, on our adrenals, on our endocrine system, on our cognitive function, on our stress hormone release, on our gut health. There's just this laundry list of ways that this impacts us. And I don't think a lot of women are really given a ton of education before they decide to go on. If you want to dive deeper into this, there's a book called Beyond the Pill by Dr. Jolene Brighton. It's an amazing resource. She really dives into a lot of the ways this can impact you, and I highly suggest it as a resource. But all things aside, I don't think a lot of women are really understanding fully the impact that hormonal birth control can have on their body before they decide to go on it. And then when they come off, they aren't really properly educated on what that can look like for them. I've had a lot of women come to me in practice who are recently coming off of birth control, and they feel like shit. Something like acne can flare up, that hair loss can happen, their moods can go a little crazy. And they weren't really warned about that, so they think something's wrong. But truthfully, that is, just post-birth control syndrome at work, and that can take, 4 to 6 months for the average person to really clear up. But if you give yourself support during that time, it can shorten that window of time where things feel pretty crappy. Again, this is not everybody's experience. Some women come off birth control and feel amazing. I love that for you. I wish that was my experience. But really, I'm very thankful in the long run for having the experience that I did coming off birth control, because it forced me to learn about what was going on in my body. It forced me to, educate myself on how I could support my body through this transition. And it really forced me to understand how my cycle worked and how I could prevent pregnancy without having to rely on something like hormonal birth control. So I've been off birth control now for 8 years. 9 years, no, 8 years. And again, best possible decision I could have made for myself. This is a personal decision. You have to decide what's best for you. I had a supportive partner who was willing to work with me in terms of, helping me out with fertility awareness methods. He's willing to wear an alternative method of contraceptive, which I know, unfortunately, there's a lot of partners who are not open to that. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. If you're deciding to go off birth control and track your cycles, track your basal body temperature, track your fertile window, if you have somebody that you're having sex with that can get you pregnant, using another method of contraceptive is an important piece of the puzzle. They have to be open to that. Otherwise, they're not going to be getting it. Like, plain and simple, because your fertile window, again, is that time during the month where you can get pregnant. Everybody's cycle is a little bit different. On average, quote unquote, women ovulate around day 14 of their cycle, but this does not mean that that happens for every single person. That's why using something like the temp drop or natural cycles to confirm with your body temperature, because after you ovulate, your body temp goes up and it stays high, usually through the end of your cycle, at least for a few days after ovulation. This is how we confirm when you ovulate and when you're fertile. Not everybody's going to ovulate on day 14. Not everybody has a 28-day cycle. Your cycle might look different. I'll probably go through another episode where I'm just going through each phase of the menstrual cycle, because I know this is something that is really important for us to know about. But with this, topic more centered around birth control, I just want you to understand that yes, birth control is an effective contraceptive, but it is not the only way. We also have other options like the non-hormonal IUD, the Paragard. This is something that, I kind of have mixed feelings about. I think some women respond really well to it. Others experience, heavy bleeding and more cramping with it, which is, just kind of a side effect of the copper IUD because it's a literal foreign object in your uterus. And sometimes your uterus doesn't like that. So if you are somebody who already has pretty heavy, pretty painful periods, sometimes the copper IUD is not the best option. Other hormonal IUDs like the Mirena or the smaller like Skyla, Kylena, whoever the fuck names those. I have a bone to pick with you. Why do we have to name them that? But these like shorter term IUDs versus the Mirena, the longer term IUD, can be another alternative option for you if you still want, the safety and security of being on a hormonal birth control, but you don't want to be taking the pill. There's a little bit less side effects with things like the IUD. Personally, I tried one and it didn't feel great for me too. I got a lot of cramping. I experienced some uncomfortable symptoms while I was on it, a lot of spotting, but everybody's so different. So that is another option you can look into is either the non-hormonal IUD, the Paragard, the copper IUD, or a hormonal IUD like the Mirena, or the Kylena, whatever the fuck it's called. There's also the patch, the implant. There's plenty of options for birth control, but when we lump them all together, I'd say a lot of women have experiences on hormonal birth control where they just genuinely don't feel great. And they stay on it because they don't think that there's any other options to control the symptoms they were having before. They don't think that there's any other options to prevent pregnancy. So they just kind of stay on it and they feel like shit, which again, we're not here to live a life where we feel like shit. And I just want you to question things. So first question is, why did you go on birth control? If you're on it, why did you go on hormonal birth control? And if you didn't go on it for contraceptive use only, what other solutions, what other options are there? If you went on hormonal birth control for something like acne, have you tried other options? Have you looked into alternative or functional medicine, naturopathic medicine? Have you looked into holistic solutions for acne? If that's not feasible for you and staying on birth control is the best option, again, stay on it. Do what you got to do. But why did you go on birth control in the first place? If it wasn't for contraceptive, what other solutions out there? Have you explored them? And if not, maybe it's time. How do you feel while you're on hormonal birth control? So really get honest with yourself. Take inventory of how you feel. Again, I didn't recognize that I was having a headache every single day until I came off birth control and I didn't have a headache anymore. It was like, holy shit, I've been living with a headache every day for 7 years and I didn't even recognize it. I was popping Motrin and ibuprofen all day long and didn't think anything of it. So how do you feel while you're on birth control? How does your mood feel? How does your body feel? Do you feel mostly good? Great. I love that for you. Do you feel meh? Do you feel like shit? Be honest with yourself. There are other options you can explore too, again, within that realm of staying on hormonal birth control. So if you don't feel great on the pill, you can try another option, or you can decide to come off and let your cycle regulate out itself and support yourself in other ways. So the question of, if you're on birth control right now and whether you should stay on it or not, again, such a huge personal decision. Definitely a lot of things to weigh, whether you have the support to do something like fertility awareness. Again, it's highly effective when used correctly. There's so many resources out there to help you get started and to do so effectively. It's a little bit of a learning curve. It does involve taking responsibility for learning how your body works, making sure you're using other methods of contraceptive until you're really confident. But once you get into a groove with fertility awareness, with temperature tracking, cycle tracking, for me and a lot of the women that I've worked with, it's been one of the best things that I've done for my body because now I so deeply understand how my body works. I am so confident in knowing when I'm fertile, when I'm not fertile, what I need to do about that. And I have a much better understanding of what phase of my cycle I'm in and how that's impacting me. Again, I'll go through all of that in another episode because it's way too much to throw into this. But understanding how your body works at such a deep, intimate level with something like fertility awareness for me has been an absolute, like, a privilege. Truly is a privilege for me to be able to do that. And I hope that this episode maybe sparks some inspiration in you that it is something that's feasible for you. There are resources to support you in doing so. And when you get into a groove with that, when you get comfortable with it, it can be such a great experience to connect you back into your body. So deciding whether to stay on birth control or not, there's definitely things to consider. If you went on hormonal birth control for symptom management for something like endometriosis, fibroids, again, I think those are really valid reasons why women go on because we don't want to deal with excruciating pain every single month. I don't think you should have to. But again, are there other options you can explore? Are there, other providers you can look into working with maybe while you're still on birth control that can support you through something like endo? In my personal practice, I worked with a lot of women who are experiencing, significant pain from endo, PCOS, fibroids, things like that. And conventional medicine may not have a ton of options for you. They may have birth control, they may have things like surgeries. Again, when they're necessary, great. They work, they do their thing. Not here to shit on that. But there are so many options in the world of, alternative medicine, functional medicine that can be really supportive for these concerns as well. So have you explored those other options? Is that something that's feasible for you? Maybe something to look into, and you can consider that as part of this conversation about birth control. So my journey with birth control, again, really opened my eyes about how little I knew about my body. Again, I didn't know much until I went to medical school. And then I was like, why am I on this? What am I doing? I don't feel good. There is a lot of things that can happen when our body goes on birth control, when we go into this, artificial menopausal like state, when we are depleting nutrients that are depleted by especially the oral contraceptive pill. There's just a lot of unfortunate side effects that can happen. There are some risks involved with going on birth control, just like any medication. So I hope, this conversation just gives you a little bit more insight into getting curious about how you feel if you are on birth control or if you're considering going on. How do you feel? Why did you go on it in the first place? Are there other options for you available? If not, again, there's no shame in staying on hormonal birth control. I don't mean that to be the tone of this conversation. This is my personal experience and the experience of women that I've worked with that have had similar experiences to me of not feeling well while they're on it, feeling worse when they come off. And then once that kind of moves through, like really tapping deeply into their bodies and how good you can feel. I want that to be available to you if you can. So I will drop some resources in the show notes of this, at least for some ways you can start to support yourself if you are on hormonal birth control. Beyond the Pill, again, as a book, if you want to dive more into it, that's a great resource. I used Hemp Drop, which is the way that I track my cycles and fertility and use that for contraceptive. Natural Cycles is also another option. And this is something that can be an ongoing conversation. If you, if you feel like you want to know more about birth control, menstrual cycles, all of those things, feel free to let me know in a DM on Instagram at docjenb_ND. I'm always, wanting to provide resources and things that are valuable for you. So if there's specific questions or things that you want to know about birth control, about your menstrual cycles, let me know. Maybe I'll do an episode on it. This journey coming off of birth control, understanding how my body works, feeling like shit for 7 years, then feeling worse after going off for a little while, and then starting to feel better again, really taking charge of my hormonal health and really understanding how my body works was truly such a journey for me. And I hope that you feel like you have the support to go through that journey and make it a little easier than what I went through. I hope that this episode's been helpful for you. And again, if you want to know more, let me know what you want to know. so I can give you more on another episode. Check the show notes for those resources, and I will see you on the next ep. I love you.